This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me here today from the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts in Adams, Massachusetts, right?
Very close. Okay. North Adams, Massachusetts.
Is Dr. Andrew Best. Good morning. Welcome. How are you? I'm doing really good.
I'm okay.
I'm really excited to have you on because today we are going to talk about sweat. And it's a really cool topic because it's actually something that is, while not 100% unique to humans, is something that helps make us superhuman in the way that we are in our kind of our function. So I'm excited to talk about sweat.
Me too. I love talking about sweat.
I know. I was talking to my coworker yesterday. I was like, "Oh, I get to interview this guy, and we're going to talk about sweat." And I'm like, "There's all these interesting things." And she looked at me and she's like, "Gabby, I don't know if that's an appropriate topic for a first date." And I was like, "What?" She did not hear the word interview, and she was like, "Why are you?" She's like, "Do you have a sweating problem? Like, what is going on?"
I mean, it's going to come out sooner or later, right? You might as well lead with it. Look, before this goes any further, before we order our first drink, I'm going to sweat and you're going to have to be okay with it.
Just going to be like pools of sweat, which is actually a condition. It's called hyperhidrosis.
Uh-huh.
I think before we get started, before we like start talking about why sweat is like and the way that we sweat is like such a human thing to do, can you explain what sweat is?
Yeah. So sweat is mostly water. Well, I'll tell you what it's made of, and I'll tell you why we have it.
Okay.
It's mostly water. Second most common ingredient is salt, sodium chloride, followed by trace amounts of other minerals, really small amounts, and then any small molecules in your blood that are able to get into the precursor sweat might also find their way out in your sweat, like lactate and some other things. But yeah, it's really mostly water, and its whole function is to coat the surface of your skin so that as your skin gets hot, it can take a lot of that heat off of your skin as it evaporates. So it transitions from a liquid to a gas. And as anyone who has, jumped into a cold pool or even a warm pool has noted, liquids like water are really effective at removing heat from surfaces. So this was nature's way of, giving us a water bottle to carry around and dump water on our skin. Of course, a water bottle is not a biological structure. So instead, we have several million little sweat glands, and we have to use our own body fluids. We have to sacrifice them, which is, no small cost, in order to keep our bodies cool. And for humans, that's been a super important part of our ecological niche, is being able to move in the heat.
Yeah. One thing I want to note, because I hadn't really thought about it or looked it up until last night, to be 100% honest with you, is that sweat glands, they just look like little balls of spaghetti with like a little tube leading either to your skin or to a hair follicle. And they have different names depending on what they lead to.
Yes.
Right? The one that leads to your skin is eccrine.
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that leads to the hair follicle is apocrine.
Yes.
And then I was reading last night that they have like slightly different sweat. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what I focus on, what I imagine we'll talk about because it's what's relevant to cooling, is eccrine sweat. So that's the sweat that's, mostly water and a bit of salt. And you have way more of those sweat glands than you do apocrine. They're covering your whole body surface, just about. There's some variation, which is what I'm interested in, but roughly 100 eccrine sweat glands per square centimeter of your skin.
Wait, that's crazy. That's so many.
Yeah, it's a lot. So you've got like 3 or 4 million, the average person. Like we can talk about where they're most common, whatever. But the apocrine sweat glands make a thicker sweat that's oilier. So it's, helping to, produce the secretions that are coating, the shaft of your hair, in conjunction with sebaceous glands, which make oils. These are the sweat glands you find really mostly in your armpits, and they're associated with those hairs. And they're also the ones that create this thicker sweat that certain kinds of bacteria like to feed on. And so that's what armpit body odor is, it's the metabolism of the bacteria eating that sweat. So humans don't have a whole lot of those left, but apocrine sweat glands are kind of like the OG sweat gland in that. So other animals have a lot of these. I mean, most mammals have apocrine sweat glands all over their body
because they're covered in hair.
They're covered in hair.
Much more hair than us, I should say.
Yep, much more hair than us, and of course, those hairs are thicker. So, in a related point, we are still fairly hairy as primates, but our hairs have gotten microscopically thin, and we've lost most of the apocrine glands associated with them. But yeah, so the apocrine sweat glands for us are kind of this like vestige. We could argue about whether the scents from your armpits are actually communicating something, like pheromones or whatever. But much more important for other animals, and actually some other primates use them to cool. So they actually make enough sweat out of those glands that they can use those to help with their eccrine cooling. Like chimpanzees have both types of sweat glands in abundance and will use both of them for cooling. And some animals have gone so far as to repurpose apocrine sweat glands and make that sweat more watery, kind of like a convergent evolution towards eccrine sweat glands. So horses, that's how horses sweat. They can make a lot of sweat and they can use that to cool off, but those are apocrine glands. Yeah.
That's really cool. I had no idea. I'm a lifelong horseback rider, and that is one of the things that it's like one of the fun facts that they tell you when you first start is that it's like humans and horses are some of the only animals that like sweat super effectively, which is why they're both good at long distance things in a way that a lot of other animals aren't.
Especially in the heat. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, yeah, that's what makes us both good at, running in the heat. I mean, there are definitely animals that are way better than us if it's not hot. Wolves and sled dogs, have a huge aerobic capacity and huge level of endurance. But if it's hot, they kind of wither.
Yeah.
So that's really where the superpower lies, in that we can keep doing physical work in the heat when most other animals can't.
Yeah. I think a lot of people call them factoids, or it sounds like a factoid that dogs like sweat through their paws primarily. That's actually true. Like that's like the primary sweat gland location for most dogs. So like it's not a way for them to cool off. Which, side note, if you hike with your dog a lot, you should make sure you carry a lot of water to both pour over them and to let them drink to help them cool off and give them lots of breaks. I've helped a few people hiking up here in the Oakland Hills in the summer whose dogs were in distress because it was so hot. People just don't, because they cannot cool the same way we can.
Right.
The other thing that I found really interesting about apocrine sweat glands is some creatures have repurposed them even more deeply, like skunks. Did you know this?
I did not know that.
Yeah, they use they have like specialized, basically super apocrine sweat glands, and that's where they make their stink.
I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, they all do. So sweat glands of both types and like mammary glands all come from the same kind of tissue. So it doesn't take a whole lot of a genetic change or a developmental change to reprogram, those into a differently purposed skin appendage.
Yeah. Yeah. Skunks are on the brain because we actually have a bunch living in my neighborhood. And my dog thinks, despite not liking any other dogs, she thinks skunks are friends.
We've had that experience. Well, my dogs think skunks are to be chased and get sprayed.
Oh, no.
Almost worse than getting porcupined. I mean, not as bad for the dog, but it's worse for the dog owners, the dog's humans, because the stink, as you know, lasts for weeks.
Yeah, it's crazy. Anyway, okay, sorry. This is a little side quest down apocrine sweat glands and other mammals. But yeah, so it's basically like us, horses, and they're still using their apocrine sweat glands, but like in terms of like the long distance hot running that we're able to do. How did our ability to be hot and go long places, like how is that tied into our evolutionary past? Like what does that tell about our story?
Yeah, so a lot of this we have to figure out, through inference and detective work. And the sweat glands do not fossilize. There's not a ton of cultural evidence, showing how humans were thinking a million years ago. But if you put it all together, it would seem that with the shifting climate in Africa that our ancestors were living in. It was getting drier. The forest is receding into more of a open woodland. And as a primate, then, especially as an ape, then you had some choices. You can go extinct. You can reduce your range and maintain a similar ape and primate like lifestyle by just staying in the forest as it slowly recedes, or you can expand out into this new ecological niche of trying to make a living in this more open habitat, which requires gathering different types of foods, maybe scavenging meat, at some point hunting. And I think the conventional thinking in anthropology now is that shift to really trying to exploit this new habitat is really what drove human intelligence and cooperation and cultural evolution. But also this shift to being a more efficient biped, to being an animal that really can cover ground and remain active in this hot environment, particularly in the heat of the day. Because if you can do that, you can be less susceptible to predation. I mean, all of the big cats and the other animals that like to hunt humans and primates really aren't all that active during the heat of the day. They don't have great ways to cool off. Everyone knows this if you watch like the nature shows. It's usually like dawn and dusk or even nighttime when all these crazy hunts are happening. They have to use like the night vision goggles. So yeah, the thinking really is that there was a selective pressure to favor all of these adaptations that would help early humans exploit this habitat. And a part of that requires heat tolerance and being able to get rid of metabolic heat. And we make so much of it. And if you really store almost any of it, you're eventually going to cook. You really have to dissipate the vast majority of heat that your body makes. And sweating is by far the most effective way to do that. So it was sort of hit upon in early catarrhines. So what we used to call the old world monkeys, right? And so we see that this type of sweat gland, eccrine sweat glands, which all mammals have on their paws, and was probably used to generate a little bit of extra traction. So as your skin gets a little wetter, it gets a little more compliant and more traction. Probably good for, climbing and gripping and things like that mammals do. For some reason, this started to spread to the whole body surface. And once it did, at some point, hard to say whether the initial push for this was, thermoregulation or I don't know how far this hypothesis has been taken, but I saw in the last couple of years someone trying to develop a hypothesis for another reason why this initial spread would have happened. I think it has something to do with immune function. I've never actually seen the paper that came out of that. But whether it's a pre-adaptation or not, it's clearly effective for cooling. And we can see that actually chimpanzees are able to thermoregulate a bit, not nearly as well as us. So are other monkeys that are catarrhines. So the eccrine sweating worked. And at a certain point in the human lineage, in the hominin lineage, it seems to have exploded. So there must have been a tremendous selective pressure for this. I mean, we have 10 times more sweat glands than our primate relatives. And all of that had to have happened in the last couple million years. I mean, we have 10 times more than our closest primate relatives, apes. So clearly, the other things that were happening to make us human in the hominin lineage, right, with Australopithecus transitioning into Homo, that's where all the interesting human stuff is happening fairly quickly. Clearly, sweat gland proliferation is part of that. And you probably can't separate any of these things, right? Like, whenever someone says X or Y made us human, that's an oversimplification. It's all of these things together had to be happening and co-evolving in order for us to be able to exploit this niche.
Yeah, I think the longer I'm in science, the longer I firmly believe that anyone who tries to tell you it's just one thing as an answer is either trying to sell you something or has not a full understanding of the topic, because it's impossible to say it's just one thing. Like I still periodically by like colleagues and coworkers, like just regular people out in the street, they'll say, is it nature versus or is it nurture? Like, which one is it? I'm like, it's both.
Of course it's both.
It's both. It can't, it's sometimes a little bit more one than the other, but it's never just one. It just doesn't work that way.
And most things don't. I mean, I think that's a great rule for spotting a huckster or a pseudoscientist or someone's trying to sell you something like wellness influencers. I mean, if there was a single cause for anything important, they wouldn't have to sell you the solution.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if the story's too easy, if it's a just so story, that's the time that you should be like, maybe I should look into this a little bit more. Okay, so fast forward to now. I will say most of us have sweat glands because I think I read about some disorder where people like can't sweat, which is crazy. I had never heard of that either.
Yeah.
Anhidrosis, maybe?
Yeah, and I believe those people do still have sweat glands, but the innervation is not working properly. They're not responding to acetylcholine and in the way they should be to stimulate sweat. So those, yeah, I've had one or two folks with that condition walk up to me after talks, and I don't have any medical advice for anything, but especially that. And I just say, wow, that must be really tough for you. Like, how much can you move? And they say, well, in the summer, I have to be like pretty sedentary because you can overheat so quickly if you can't sweat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even in the winter, like the amount of exercise you can do, because you start sweating pretty freely in the winter too. Like if you imagine everyone on the East Coast right now is apparently buried under feet of snow.
And it's super cold.
It's super cold. But like you still start sweating once you start shoveling, Because
I don't care if it's 0 degrees, 2 inches outside of your coat. The layer of air that's right up against your skin is probably getting pretty hot. Mm-hmm. So you are getting hot doing all that work.
Yeah. And so that makes it really complicated to just exist physically, like in doing exercise and stuff. Okay. So most of us have sweat glands. Do people in general have the same number of sweat glands as each other, or is there variation?
There seems to be variation in the range of like twofold. So from some research I've done and some other research on this that mostly dates back to the 60s and 70s. And that was a long pause when almost no one did this kind of stuff. It seems like for an average, at least for the body sites I look at, so the caveat is I don't count sweat glands on the forehead, which has the highest density. But pretty much the rest of the body, you're looking at roughly 100 sweat glands per square centimeter, but it can be as low as 50 to 60 and as high as, 160. So there's a range of 2 to 3-fold in terms of variation. Now, some of that can be explained just by differences in body surface area. So, it kind of seems like when you're a fetus, you have X number of cells that can differentiate into eccrine gland cells. And then the larger that you get as you develop, those sweat glands in your skin become spread further apart. There's some more work that needs to be done there to figure out actually, how that develops and whether someone who's quote unquote genetically programmed to be a larger person has more of those cells to start with. I don't think we know that, at least I don't. But we generally see that a lot of the variation between people in sweat gland density, anyway, per unit area, is explained by differences in body surface area. So smaller people with less skin tend to have more sweat glands per unit area. But even when you account for that, there's still plenty of variation. So there's a couple explanations for that. I think, one part of it could be that selection for a particular sweat gland density has been relaxed for, tens of thousands of years. That's possible. So we've been subject to genetic drift. What I think might be a bigger factor is that selection pushed us towards a particular range of sweat gland density, and that, in between those two goalposts, it's all good and there's not a lot of selection. And it's only if you have, too few or too many that there could potentially be a fitness cost. So that's kind of what my sweat research is trying to get at, is figure out what is the lower threshold and upper threshold that selection is likely to be acting on.
Oh, actually, that reminds me of something. One of the things that I was reading in your paper is that sweat glands have glycogen stores.
They do.
How and why? Like, what are they doing?
Yeah. So for any of your listeners not familiar with glycogen, it is wonderful. It is a bunch of glucose sugars all stuck together in a convenient storage package. And your muscle cells store a lot of it. Your liver stores a lot of it. And the glycogen in those two places is largely responsible for maintaining your blood sugar when you haven't eaten. So the fact that you're blood sugar doesn't go up or down really all that much during the day, regardless of when you ate. It's largely to do with using that sink of stored glycogen to release glucose into your blood when you need it. But your sweat glands also have it because, even though they're tiny, each little sweat gland does have to do some work. They have to do some cell respiration in order to power the little pumps, the little cell membrane pumps that are responsible for making sweat, for moving.
They still have to do a little bit of work doing respiration.
Yeah. So the cells in the coil of your several million sweat glands have to do some cell respiration to make ATP to power these little pumps, these little cell membrane pumps that any of your listeners who like biology are familiar with. You've got to know your cells, which, by the way, is what's taking up a lot of the energy for your body right now, is just powering these little cell membrane pumps. But you need those little pumps to make sweat in each little sweat gland. So just like a muscle, it's nice to have some stored fuel right there and available. So yeah, you've got granules of glycogen right in some of the cells of the coil of your sweat glands. So they will use that as a fuel source. They'll also use, I believe they'll also use blood glucose. I think they'll use lactate. So like other cell types, they're a bit flexible.
And part of the reason I brought that up was because a paper that you wrote in 2018, or that was released in 2018, which is the evolution of eccrine sweat glands in humans and non-human primates, where you did a little bit of work on variation. And I thought that you were looking just for sweat glands, but you were also looking for the glycogen associated with those sweat glands.
Yeah. So first of all, I've always hated the title of that paper. What was it? Human and non-human primates. So we're referring to humans as human primates. That's kind of redundant. And we never caught that. We came up with a title and we're like, that's good enough. Like human primates. That's we don't need to say that. Anyway, I've cringed every time I've heard that title. Yeah. So this was a project that was suggested by my PhD advisor. He knew actually there was all this comparative work done on the skin of primates in the 60s and 70s, where a couple teams of researchers used really the same methods to do histological examinations of primate skin to compare and contrast and characteristics of sweat glands in these different species. So we compiled all that and tried to analyze it a little more quantitatively. And we found that in primate species that live in hot and dry climates, currently, they tended to have more glycogen in their sweat glands. Now, we weren't able to distinguish whether, that's an evolutionary adaptation. I think it's maybe more likely the result, or just basically the sweat glands get trained. I mean, the more that you use a sweat gland, it's kind of like a muscle, they adapt. So I think it's possible that they just learn to store more glycogen. But I think it's evidence that, sweat glands really are malleable to how they're used and to the climate that they've either evolved in or are currently being used in. So yeah, glycogen's a fuel, and in that sense, it's kind of a proxy for how much we would expect that sweat gland, to be doing.
So based on that paper, it sounds like there might be variation across populations depending on, is it depending on like where they evolved or where the population currently lives?
That's a good question. And our methods were not able to, make that distinction. You'd have to basically take maybe a captive population of these primates that are in a zoo in, say, a temperate climate, and basically take some skin and do the histology of the sweat glands and compare that with the skin of the same species living in, their natural habitat, which, as far as I know, has not been done.
So graduate students out there, if you're looking for a dissertation topic.
I mean, it's not to the primates, but it would be interesting.
Okay. Does more sweat glands automatically equal more sweat?
I don't think so. And that is what has bugged me for a couple of years. When other people have looked at that, not really as like the prime question of their studies, but when they've examined that as part of what they're doing, they haven't found a lot of correlation between how many sweat glands you have and how much sweat you make. And I haven't either. And so that's interesting, right? I mean, wouldn't you expect that more sweat glands means that you make more sweat? Well, no, the amount of sweat that you make. So first of all, the intra-individual variation there. So you day to day or month to month, how much sweat you make will change based on your level of acclimatization. So more metabolic heat that you make and the hotter environments you're in where it's harder to get rid of it, your body learns pretty quickly it needs to make more sweat and start doing that at a very low threshold of core temperature increase. Right. So that's one way that you will acclimatize. And the inter-individual variation seems to be due to a lot of genetic and maybe developmental factors, only a few of which we know. There's a handful of genes that seem to be associated with this. But really, a lot of what explains the variation in how much people sweat isn't well understood. I mean, you get two people who are fully acclimatized. So, they've been exercising in the heat for weeks or months, and they could still have a several-fold variation in how much sweat they make over their whole body. And it's not like we only make enough sweat that's, just enough to evaporate and cool us effectively. Some of us, myself included, make more sweat than is even useful. So if you are dripping sweat, that's sweat that's not evaporating, and it's taking some heat off your skin, just like water in a pool is. But if it's not evaporating, it's not taking nearly as much heat. So our bodies don't seem to know exactly how much sweat is necessary. And there's all this variation in how much we sweat. We don't really know what causes it. It doesn't seem to be related to how many sweat glands you have. So that means that people with very few sweat glands, and I'm one of them, I've got in the body sites that I've looked at, something like, 80 or 90 sweat glands per square centimeter on average. Whereas other people that have the same body surface area I do could have up to double that. And yet I'm one of the heaviest sweaters that I've tested. I can sweat. This isn't a brag because actually it kind of sucks in some ways, but I can sweat, almost 3 liters per hour if it's really hot and humid. I've measured 2.5, and that wasn't even going that hard, which, what's that? That ends up being like 5 pounds of, a sweat loss in an hour.
Wait, how did you measure that?
Oh, that's really easy. Basically just weigh yourself before and after.
Oh, okay.
And a little bit of the weight that you lose will be respiratory.
Right.
Especially if the air is dry. If it's humid, not much of it is respiratory losses. And a little bit will be the carbohydrates and fat that you burn, which you can estimate. But basically, like 90 something % or more of the weight you lose during a workout is sweat.
Huh.
So you can just do a simple before and after weighing and estimate it.
That's really cool. I'm definitely going to do that the next time I go running. I'll start and end at my gym because I don't own a scale, but
yeah, good. I mean, who needs it? But yeah, just make sure if you drink anything during the workout, you have to account for that.
Okay.
If you urinate during the workout, you have to estimate that. So I basically just don't drink or pee in the workout. And then,
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all this variation in how much people sweat. We don't totally know what causes it. It's so curious to me that the body will make more sweat than it needs to. And I mean, that what I think that suggests is that our bodies have evolved to, sort of treat the problem of overheating as a much more immediate and serious problem and kind of worry about water and salt loss later.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't survive this moment of overheating, then what's the point in being able to conserve water and salt, right? So hopefully you can make up for that later.
Yeah. I think that the heating and cooling of our bodies is some of the most interesting stuff that we do, especially in terms of homeostasis. And I was thinking about this the other night when I was laying in bed with a fever, and I was like so angry and so sweaty. But the fever is something that your body does. It basically turns up your internal temperature to cook the bugs in your body. And if you cannot cool yourself off, you will eventually cook yourself too, along with the bugs in your body. That's why, like, if you reach a certain temperature, they're like, you should go to the hospital to help get you cooled down, or why they tell you to take like a fever reducer, an NSAID, to help with your thermoregulation. It's like a very complicated, subtle, and not subtle at the same time system that we have evolved to have. And again, it's pretty special amongst mammals.
One thing, so folks who have suggested, that humans probably weren't doing a lot of long distance running or walking in the heat, have said, well, the risk of dehydration is just too great, and that's been modeled. And it's true that if you're on, like, say, a persistence hunt where you're running and jogging and walking, there's a lot of walking, for like 20 miles at a time. Early humans would have gotten pretty dehydrated, but the modeling suggests that they could do that and not get to dehydration points that are lethal. But I think the fact that we can sweat this much means that probably at some point there was a selective pressure to have this capacity. So the thing I'm most interested in now, I don't know if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please do.
So the next phase of this research, I want to know if sweat gland density has any relationship to how much salt you use. If you have any athletes listening, kind of a hip thing to do now is to get your sweat sodium tested, right? To get a sweat test. So if you get a sweat test, you'll pay a couple $100, and the researchers will tell you how much sweat you lose. By the way, you can do that yourself, just pre and post weigh. And they'll use a simple device basically to measure the salt in your sweat. There are some ways you really need to be careful in how you collect the sweat. There's a lot of ways to contaminate it, and probably some of the companies out there that are selling this maybe are not super accurate with that. But anyway, so it's this whole thing: how much salt is in your sweat, right? And we've been telling athletes the last couple of years, you really need to be replacing salt in your sweat. Actually, longer than that. That's kind of the whole thing of Gatorade, right? Like, they used to say replace what you sweat out, and now they say help replace what you sweat out. But actually, really, another tangent, probably the reason why Gatorade is more helpful than water isn't that you're replacing salt, it's that having more salt in what you drink helps you retain it better. So I want to know if there's any relationship between sweat gland density and how much salt you lose. And I have pretty good reason to think that there is. So we know that the faster that sweat comes out of a gland, the less time there is for that gland to reabsorb sodium. So your sweat starts out very salty, like as salty as your blood. But then as it travels up the coil and the duct, most of that salt gets reabsorbed back into your interstitial fluid and into your blood. So you don't lose that much salt. We wouldn't want to lose that much salt. But the higher the sweat rate per gland, the less time there is for reabsorption. So at higher sweat rates, you tend to lose more salt. So each of us, our sweat gets saltier as we're sweating more. But for two people with the same sweat rate, but different numbers of sweat glands to produce the same amount of sweat, it means the person with fewer sweat glands has to have a faster sweat rate per gland.
Right.
That just follows.
Right.
And it also follows then that they're less able to reabsorb salt. So what I'm after here is to test the hypothesis that salt conservation, which is mostly accomplished by your kidneys, they're very good at that, but salt conservation at the level of sweat gland density, selective pressure towards having more sweat glands, right? So you can make your skin nice and sweaty with, the low sweat gland density that I have. But is there a penalty of salt loss with that? And so maybe one of the reasons why we have so many sweat glands is actually an additional kind of unconsidered, not yet considered salt conservation mechanism.
Yeah, that's interesting. It does make me wonder, one of your other areas of research that we're not going to really talk about today is people who engage in like ultra marathons, like extreme sport, I suppose, ultra endurance sports. And it makes me wonder if those athletes have a greater density of sweat glands in general than like your average person or not.
No, I mean, a lot of the people that I've counted sweat glands in are athletes. They don't really seem to be any different.
Huh.
So the variation in sweat gland density doesn't really seem to map onto at all, how athletic someone is or how successful they are in some sport.
Yeah.
Because it's independent, you can make a lot of sweat with very few glands. You can have a lot of glands and not sweat very much at all.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that's unexplored here really is salt loss.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I've asked you all of the questions I had. Is there anything that you want to talk about that we didn't get to?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just some like practical advice. I mean, I don't know how many of your listeners are athletes, but if you're sweating a lot in the heat, some of the more recent research that's come out, and actually, I know you're going to ask me what have I been reading. One of the most recent papers I read is a paper by Alan McCubbin. It's from last year, and he made a pretty good case basically doing all the math and stuff and showing that unless you're a very salty sweater, you really need to be exercising in the heat for like 4+ hours to have to worry about salt loss.
Hmm.
That your sweat sodium concentration will be just fine doing a lot of sweating, because as you sweat, you lose more water than salt, right? So effectively, your blood and your body fluids get saltier. So all this advice we're getting of taking a lot of sodium and a lot of salt, during exercise, most of us probably don't need to do that. You can just replace it later as you're replacing fluids.
Mm.
So just a little point of caution here that our diets, especially in America and the West, are plenty salty. And if you have a typical American diet, most of us don't need to worry about replacing salt during exercise unless you're an extreme athlete and a salty sweater, and it's in the summer.
And you're going for a long time.
Over a long time. Yep.
Yeah. That's really good advice. I don't think I ever had a sports drink. I mean, I had like a couple when I was a kid, but my parents, it was a very like classic immigrant parent thing that they did. They were like, no, this is some American nonsense. And it's so weird because my mom was so into having what she calls cultural experiences, like capital C, capital E. And there were some things that she was just like, that's American nonsense. And sports drinks was one of them. Sometimes my friends' moms would buy them for me because when you're little, like it's so sugary too, like it tastes good. Yeah, I've had a couple of people try and convince me to get on the train as an adult. And I'm like, I don't really enjoy them very much. Now I feel very vindicated. I'm like, I can just drink water and I'm totally fine.
I drink a lot of Gatorade because it's delicious. It helps me to drink more. And not that I'm a very salty sweater. Actually, the data that I'm getting now would suggest that I'm not. But it does help you retain what you're drinking. Mm-hmm. So if you want to drink a lot of fluid all at once and not just pee it all out, it does help to have some salt.
That's fair. And this is actually something that, again, going back to my horse girl roots, in the summer, we give the horses electrolytes on their food to encourage them to drink more water and then also to retain it. Because sometimes horses don't want to stay alive. And so you have to do things to convince them to stay alive.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. They do seem like very nervous creatures to me.
They're like these huge, giant, fragile animals. I ask any horse person, like the amount of ways that they have found to kill themselves is like, it's really astounding. Like, and it's horrifying. Do you know, for example, horses cannot vomit? Neither can giraffes or zebras for that matter, but they can't vomit. So if they eat something that disagrees with them, they just die. Like, no one knew that vomiting was a superpower, but it is. Next time your dog vomits, be like, congrats. Amazing. Yeah. Anyway, enough about horses. As you noted, we have the what are you reading section of the interview.
Yeah.
So the first question is, if people are interested in the kind of science you do, if they're interested in sweat in general or human performance, where is a good place for them to start?
Well, if you're a scientist, if you have a good training in anatomy and physiology or exercise physiology, there's a bunch of papers that I could recommend you. And your listeners are welcome to email me and I can recommend them. But other than that, I mean, handful of, let's see, there's a couple of, I'm trying to think, who's on social media that's giving good sweat physiology related advice. There's an Instagram account called My Sport Science, and that researcher's name is Asker Jukentrop with a J. He makes really easily comprehensible summaries of all kinds of physiological topics as related to sport physiology. One of them is sweat. So My Sport Science, Asker Jukentrop on Instagram is good. Let's see, I've been interviewed for a handful of articles that I think give a pretty good and basic overview of sweat. Don't really remember what they are. They're all fuzzy. I mean, as far as reading my papers, you'd probably have to email me. Most of them are behind paywalls, but I can share things if they are emailed, directly. But the thing with sweat is that it's like it's not talked about all that much in a scientific sense in like the public sphere. So there's not a lot of places you can just go to learn about it. Oh, I thought of one. I finally thought of one. The Gatorade Sports Science Institute. So it's funny. Even though Gatorade exists to convince us that we need to drink Gatorade, right? Their sports science arm is really good. And actually, a lot of the sweat science that's been done in the last few decades has been done by their scientists. So Gatorade Sports Science, they've got some pages that give a really good overview of how sweating works, how electrolyte balance works. So I would go to that site, honestly, as a starting point. I've used that as a starting point to find the papers that they've done so I can take it to them.
Yeah. I cannot personally vouch for this book, but it is sitting in my to read pile. But there is a book called The Joy of Sweat by Sarah Everts.
I'm looking at it right now.
Can you recommend it?
I can recommend it. Not just because I'm in there for a paragraph. She actually came to visit my wife and I in 2018 when she was writing the book. Yeah, that book covers like the culture of sweat, the science of sweat. It's sort of a love letter to sweat. It's fun. Yeah, The Joy of Sweat, Sarah
Everts.
Yes.
Okay, see, that's what I mean about I have to ask people how they pronounce their last name before I say them, but unfortunately she's not here to ask. So perfect. What are you reading for work right now?
Oh, honestly, a biomechanics textbook. So I mostly teach. I'm at a teaching heavy school, and sort of biomechanics is my nemesis. It's not in my wheelhouse, and so as I'm teaching it, I am reading papers and the book, and that is taking up a lot of my time. In addition to the research project and the teaching, and really all the exercise I do actually takes up the rest of my time. That's really the only work reading I'm doing now, and then papers as needed to help me build a background for the project I'm working on. But I wish I could say there's a fascinating science book reading, but there's not.
It's totally fine.
Not right now.
It's interesting because biomechanics was simultaneously the most interesting and most boring class I think I took in college.
Yeah. I'm trying to make it interesting, and I don't know if I'm succeeding.
There's like a lot of like, I'm going to sit down and just do a lot of geometry now.
Yeah.
And then there was also like, I'm going to stick sensors on myself and run, that.
Well, that's cool. We don't have a lab component to that course here. And, that's kind of a graduate level thing. And that's when it gets fun. And that's not really what we're able to do, but I'm exploring.
Yeah. I feel really lucky. I hadn't really realized how unique my undergraduate experience was. I went to the College of William and Mary, and they had dissection labs for undergrads. They had like a very
with like humans
human
or
dissection.
Oh, cadaver lab. So cool.
Yeah, they had a very strong kinesiology department. I don't really know how they got the funding or why they had so much of it. I had to get special permission because I was an anthropology student, and they're like, well, this is like really for majors only for some of the stuff. But I got permission to take a bunch of the classes, and it was great. I had a really good time. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question is, what are you consuming for fun right now?
Oh, well, let's see. My friends and I have a little book club, and we're reading our first book together. So it's just a couple of men. And so we figured we were going to solve the masculinity crisis by reading a book called Notes on Being a Man by Scott Galloway. It's kind of a famous book out there right now. And I think we're finding that it's not quite the book we thought it was. It's not bad, but it's not so much like a treatise on masculinity as it is like a memoir. And seems kind of like really geared towards like business types, which is not my ethos at all. So we're spending some time on that. Not really solving any of the world's masculinity crises yet, but we're working on it. But I mean, other than that, like a lot of science YouTube, anything related to any area of science on YouTube, I'm probably watching that. And honestly, a lot of NPR as I try to figure out whether democracy is going to survive.
Yeah,
and what that means.
My friend asked me to do something with her. She asked me to go on a long trip with her, and I sent her back this New Yorker cartoon that I saw, which is a woman on her couch who was like, yeah, let's pencil it in pending the fall of democracy. And I was like, okay, that's exactly how I feel too.
I mean, are we going to have elections? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Not to turn this into a political podcast, but find your community and figure out how you can contribute in your own way and do as much as you can, but don't do more than that.
Yes. Well put.
Right. Now it has devolved into a therapy session. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.